Have you ever gone to a car meet and thought you landed in a foreign country? Yeah, me too. Car enthusiasts have basically developed a completely different language to talk about their rides. And sometimes it can be extremely tough to keep up with. But if you're looking to make your way into gearhead culture, we're here to help. Here are 24 different car terms that every car enthusiast should know. Are you ready? Well, buckle up, because I am. Let's go. A banger. Yes, we're starting this off with a banger. But did you know that banger actually is a car term that you should know? Yep, it is, because it's simply the way that car enthusiasts refer to the cylinder of an internal combustion engine. However, for some reason, this term only applies to 4 and 6 cylinder cars. So if you want to pass as a car guy, don't call a Mustang GT an 8 banger. People are just gonna look at you like you're from a different planet. But there is the 4 banger and then there is the 6 banger. And that really is it. And if your 4 banger has been banged up, well, you might need a little bit of BONDO. And yes, BONDO is a term that refers to this kind of putty or filler that's used to make temporary body repairs. Yes, I said temporary, because you're only supposed to use BONDO as kind of a last resort. And while yes, there are people out there that think that it's an alternative to replacing body panels, it actually isn't. And you might end up with a bruised up body if you try to drift that Camaro without a dab of OPPO. Here's a term for a steering maneuver that only real gearheads are gonna know. Basically, a dab of OPPO is a term for opposite lock steering.
If you're going hard enough left, you'll find yourself turning right.
That's right, when you're gliding around a turn in a right wheel drive car and you start to lose a itty bit of traction, well, you turn your wheel in a dab of opposite direction to regain control. And of course, hit that throttle. You've been warned, tread lightly, because any more dabs and you might put yourself in an even worse position. Or better, if you're actually trying to drift. But that's not the only extravagant turning maneuver in the car guide dictionary. If you've never seen the 1970s show, The Rockford Files, you'll have absolutely no idea where this turn came from. But basically it involves throwing the car into reverse, slamming on the brakes, and just whipping the car around as quickly as possible. And once you turned around, throw that puppy into first gear and you're off to the races. And if that first gear is a manual transmission, well, then you might want to snag the ideal T. Save the manuals, because this move was seen in way too many episodes of the Rockford Files, hence the name. But unless you have some grip or a roll cage, I would be very careful with the Rockford turn. And as far as this next one, grip, it's pretty self-explanatory, wouldn't you say? It's pretty much how well the tires grip the road. And nobody wants to go rolling into a ditch because they tried to Tokyo drift but didn't have enough grip. And if you do end up in a ditch, well, you're gonna wanna check your OBD and your pulse. And if that's beaten, well, that's a good sign. But then your OBD or your onboard diagnostics, that might need some work, because it basically tells you exactly what's wrong with your car. And in older cars, you have to plug in an OBD scanner to find out what's making your car sound like an alley cat going through the blender, or why your check engine light just won't turn off.
It says check engine.
Uh-oh, tape must have fallen off.
And if you're lucky enough to have a newer car, they usually have the OBD2 system just built right into it. And that makes the diagnostic process that much easier. However, even an OBD won't even tell you if you have tire wear because of some poorly set camber. And camber is the way that your front wheels tilt, in or out. And if your front wheels tilt inward, you have negative camber. And if they tilt out, you have positive camber. And different cambers are better in different types of driving styles. And if you're just trying to commute, then I wouldn't mess with it at all. But if you're watching this channel and you're subscribed, which if you're not, hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, then you may want to sit Hellaflush. And at that point, you may want to introduce some negative camber to your life. And then you can join the Hellaflush gang, which, what does flush mean? Oh, it's another term that you need to know. And basically, flush is when your wheels align with your fender, whether that's because of the offset of your rims or the stretch of your tires, or you've applied some negative camber to your wheels. Sure, it looks cool to some people. Your parents will probably wonder what the heck you're doing, but overall, do you, boo, because it's your car. Although sitting flush does have its downsides, because if you got a ride that's hella flush, then you probably got a bit of experience with hooning. Now, if you've ever felt your heart race a little bit because you've been driving a little bit more reckless than you probably should have, yeah, that's called hooning. And you, baby, just got a taste of the hoon. Yeah, hooning is more or less just driving around the world intentionally reckless. And a big part of hooning is just trying to attract as much attention as possible from any and every onlooker. And naturally, it's a popular practice among racers. Which brings me to my next point. And yes, if you were wondering, I do like sticky rice with my khao soi, but this type of rice is something completely different. Because some people say that RICE, rice stands for race-inspired cosmetic enhancements, but not all of us agree with that. And however you define it, racers are the drivers who drive those super flashy, super loud, and ultimately super cheap compacts you see whizzing past you at obnoxious speeds. Or at least they sound like they're going obnoxious speeds. Hashtag FARTCAN. And a true racer truly knows nothing whatsoever about true car performance. Or they wouldn't be throwing on those huge spoilers, underglow, fake vents, and blacked out lights on a Chevy Cavalier. Racers are pretty much the arch nemesis of real car enthusiasts. And perhaps the most defining characteristic of a racer is a fart can. No, it's not what it sounds like. And yes, I think you and me and everybody has been tempted to put one on our car, but thankfully we never have, right?
Nope.
Because a fart can is a way too loud exhaust that has been slapped on a car that isn't even fast. And a common use of this term maybe, that damn racer on my street keeps waking up grandma with that fart can exhaust slapped on his old Honda Civic. The next term on this list is a custom touch popular with racers, and it can be done correctly, although a lot of times it's not. But I think that everybody's seen a slammed car at least once or twice in their life, right? And you may or may not have known exactly what you were looking at, but a car that's been slammed has essentially just been lowered. And sometimes its tires are tucked further into the wheel arches depending on the execution. And this custom touch can either make your car look super duper cool or look like the suspension's out and it's just ready for the junkyard. And the worst way to get that slam look, and one I do not condone whatsoever, is just cutting your springs. Yeah, don't do that. It messes with the spring rates and your car will just be bouncing around all over the road. And the only thing worse than bouncing all over the road with cut springs is an automatic transmission or a slush box. Okay, I'm just kidding. Slush boxes aren't all that bad, but it is a term for an automatic transmission. Because if you really care about all the joys of driving, then you just know that a manual transmission is way more fun. Plus, the connection between an automatic drive shaft and its engine just feels like a slushy mess rather than a solid and predictable connection on a manual. And thus, the car community came up with this awesome term. The automatic transmission equals a slush box. And if you drive one, that's okay, but you'll never know the joys of a double clutch.
Granny shifting, not double clutching like you should.
And although they didn't use the terminology correctly in the movie, double clutching is actually old school cool. See, the manual transmissions of yesteryear, I'm talking like the 40s and 50s, yeah, a long time ago, the gearboxes didn't have synchros. So to make it so you weren't grinding gears, you'd be in third gear, you'd put it into neutral with the clutch in, let the clutch out, push the clutch back in, and then put it into fourth. And nowadays, it's just a cool way to kind of make your downshift even smoother and maybe save a little bit of wear and tear on your gearbox, as long as you're not hooning. And just remember, double clutching like you should definitely takes a little bit of practice. But once you get it, you're gonna enjoy a silky smooth ride. And when you couple it with another technique called the heel toe, you might be the next Stig. Because this downshifting technique used by a manual driver is helpful when entering a corner. Basically, instead of just braking into the turn, you downshift as well. And as you're braking with your toe, you blip the gas with your heel. As you see, it's a really quick motion, but it helps the engine RPMs meet the wheel's RPMs and thus makes your ride smoother and helps you accelerate faster out of the turn. I bet you never knew that driving a stick was so complicated, and you could hit the brake and blip the throttle at the same time. Oh, sorry, you don't know what blipping the throttle is? Well, listen up. Blipping the throttle involves just tapping on the throttle for just a second, or a millisecond. And yes, while a lot of you have heard of this term before, non-gearheads don't have a clue as to why people do it. And basically the point is to bring the engine RPMs up so they match the road speed more accurately. And this lets you downshift so much more smoothly and avoids all that uncomfortable jerking when you let out the clutch. Yeah, you know you've either done it or experienced it before. It's like such a jerk that it spills your coffee. And speaking of something else that will spill your coffee, a launch. Yes, not a boat launch, but an actual launch is essentially when you launch your car extremely quickly. And luckily nowadays, a lot of cars actually have launch control, and it'll put the car at the perfect RPM. And when you let your foot off the brake, you get launched into warp speed. Yeah, baby, you just shoot off like a rocket if you get it perfect. Now, it is a little bit harder with a manual transmission because you gotta find that perfect RPM, drop the clutch, and go, baby, go. And you can pretty much do this in any car, except your 0 to 6 speed will vary quite a bit. And if you're driving a car that looks slow, but it's actually fast, well then you're driving a sleeper. And these are probably, well, I think they're my favorite type of car out there because they essentially just look like commuter cars, and looks are so deceiving because they are hiding some serious horsepower under the hood. And yes, while they may not look like much, they are packing oodles of power. And that's essentially the complete opposite of a ricer. But what's the middle ground between a ricer and a sleeper? Well, most people would say that's a tuner. And the easiest way to figure out what a tuner actually is to watch any Fast and Furious movie, which if you're a fan, I would definitely suggest you check out this ideal vid. Yeah, it's one of my favorites we've ever done. And while tuner cars usually have quite a bit of body mods, and I actually like them because they make them look sleek and speedy, the biggest difference between ricers and tuner cars is that they actually have some serious tuning to improve speed, handling, and all important pickup. Tuner cars are kind of the full meal deal. And oh, you don't know what pickup is? Well, here you go. First, what it's not is it's not your cousin's F-150. And yes, I agree, for most people, a pickup might refer to the working man's Ford truck. But for gearheads, it refers to how fast a car starts to accelerate. And when you press the pedal and it feels like a hair trigger ready to shoot your car through traffic, that, ladies and gentlemen, is pickup. But one thing that might drag down your pickup is turbo lag. If you've ever driven an underwhelming V6 and you wanted to boost that bad boy's performance, what do? Well, you might turbocharge the engine, which essentially takes gas from the exhaust to spin your turbine even faster and increase the engine's power yield, which sounds great, but there's a downside, because this method can make it take longer for all that added power to kick in. And that is what we call turbo lag. And it's essentially why the old 911 turbos were called the Widowmaker, because you'd press the gas, there would be no power, turbo would lag and then kick in, and then boom, way too much power, oversteer, off a cliff. But one of the things that all that power can help with is pushing through the drag coefficient. And yes, drag coefficient is a pretty technical term, and it has to do with how aerodynamic your car actually is. Essentially, the more wind resistant your car body is, the greater the drag coefficient. And believe it or not, this actually has a very surprising effect on your fuel economy. And if your car is shaped like a toaster oven, it could cost you some serious cash at the pump. So don't buy a Honda Element, don't buy a toaster oven. Otherwise, you're gonna pay way too much because you don't get any miles per gallon or smiles per gallon. And when aerodynamics are done right, it can give your whip some serious downforce. And downforce has to do with using aerodynamics to add more downward pressure to your car, giving it better traction. This is why you see spoilers on some cars, but don't be fooled. Some spoilers and most aftermarket spoilers are there just for style, and one that the ricers really enjoy. And that's maybe where you can eat your sticky rice on it, because they double as a table. And I'm sure as a car enthusiast, you've heard this one before. That'll buff right out. Yeah, that makes absolutely no sense to some non-car person. But the phrase that'll buff right out is basically what someone says when your car's taken on some serious damage and a long and expensive repair is on the horizon. So if you've recently totaled your mom's CRV, it's not gonna buff right out, but be prepared for somebody to tell you it will. And guys, there are 24 different terms that every car enthusiast should know. And if you're looking to get into the car community, be ready to have all these terms thrown at you. And it may not make sense at first, but as you continue to go to car shows and mingle with other car people, you'll continue to build your vocabulary. So in the comments, let us know a car term that we didn't cover, or maybe that we don't know, and let us know what it means. If you're new here, my name's Brad Danger. This is Ideal. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, hit the like button if you enjoyed the vid, and keep living the ideal lifestyle.